about the boat today.
Okay, Dad's going to talk about the boat today.
Hello. Most days I try to have this place a little bit cleaned up, but today you're getting the unvarnished version. I'll kind of get you up to speed on what I've done, so I'm around here for a second. So yesterday I think I told you I was starting to work on the breast hooks. And so what I did is I took some pattern stock and I laid it on here, and I reached underneath and I traced out the shape of these stems in here. And from that tracing I made this pattern. And as you can see, it fits the stems really well. So now the task is to make a lamination that's 1.5 inches thick, and also while I was doing it I captured the angle of these rails, and I did that when I had the pattern stock on top like this. I took my bevel gauge and I reached under and I set it for, and then I went ahead and marked it on my pattern so I know what bevel it is when I get ready to cut the sides. Found that angle by using my handy dandy bevel board. I stick it on there, and well, it kind of lined up about 21 degrees, so that's what I wrote on my pad. So now the breast hook, as I told you, it's crowned on top. It's crowned like this. It's not just flat across the top. And on the drawings it shows it to be 5/8 of an inch above the height of these rails. So in order for me to have this crown, I had to kind of figure out how much wider those pieces like my pattern was going to have to be so I could get 5/8, and I've done that probably several ways to do it. But here's what I did. Basically, I laid out my bevel, which are these two lines. There's my 21 degrees. And then I drew another line 5/8 of an inch above that. And so that's where the crown's kind of going to be. And then I drew a perpendicular off of that line. And the distance from there to there is 3/16. So the breast hook that I make needs to be 3/16 larger than my pattern, which, if you can see here, I've got about 3/16 of an inch bigger than my pattern. So now, when I cut these sides at 21 degrees, my breast hook will fit, and the top of it will be 5/8 of an inch above the rails. And then I can kind of sculpt a crown in it. That's up next, but in the meantime I went ahead and started fabricating the dagger board case. I actually, off the drawings here, I laid out on a piece of plywood, 3/8 plywood, same stuff the hole's made out of. I laid out the dagger board shape, and I found that pivot point right there. And I've already got my dagger board made up. Out of here without a bunch of stuff falling down and killing me. So I've already got my dagger board made up, and I know where my pivot point's going to be. It's going to be in the center of that epoxy plug. So after I laid this out on a piece of plywood, I found that pivot point, and I centered this over the pivot point, and then I simulated swinging that up just to make sure that this was going to contain my dagger board case, and that I had messed up somewhere. And come to find out, I did mess up. When I fabricated the dagger board, the bottom edge, I think on the plans calls that to be 6 inches. And mine ended up for some reason about 8 inches. And with this lead plug that I poured in for ballast, for weight to hold the board down, and then feathering this edge out like it's supposed to be, I had a couple of choices. I could cut a couple inches off of this, but I was afraid if I did that, by the time I feathered that again, I would be into the lead. So it was just a simple matter to make this, instead of 6 inches, make it 8 inches tall. Change the angle of this a little bit, but now the dagger board case matches my dagger board. So another mess up. But I guess it's not really a mistake unless you can't fix it. So let's see, on the dagger board case, the bottom of the boat, the keelson, that's the main structure in the bottom. It has rocker. In other words, it's slightly curved this way. And so, since this dagger box is going to glue to that keelson, I wanted to mimic that rocker or that curve. So once I took one of these layout sides of my dagger board case and sanded it down to the marks and got it real true and exactly the way I wanted it, I simply took it in the boat and set it down on one side and peeked under there and looked, and there was probably, not more than 3/16, maybe around 3/16 of an inch. And so I took my compass and I scribed and I removed material along the bottom until it set down perfectly onto the keelson. So then I took, this pattern was good then, so I laid it on top of another piece of plywood and drew it out exactly and carefully cut and sanded it. Then I actually even took a flush trimming bit on my router. I clamped those two pieces together and I ran around it with a flush trimming bit so the two sides are identical. So then today I cut out the logs and the bracing on that goes along the top, and those are epoxied in place. And then tomorrow I'll glue in the front spacer and the back spacer, and then the following day when that's all dry I'll clean it all up and then I'll install it in the boat. And actually, probably I've been kind of wanting to make the seats and put the cleats, the seats, they don't call them seats in a boat, they call them thwarts, whatever it is. But the cleats that hold the thwarts on each side, that's going to be my next. And the first one that they talk about setting is the one that runs over the back part of the dagger box. And I could have went off the drawings and measured a diagonal and then measured down from the rails and went ahead and mounted that cleat, but I just know my luck. And I know that if I would have done that, the cleats would have been a 1/4 inch above the dagger box or a 1/4 inch below the dagger box, or there would have been some kind of a horrible mix-up. So my plan is fabricate the dagger box. I'm sure now that it fits the dagger board that I made. I'm going to install it in the boat, and then I'm going to level off of it to set my cleats, and that way when I'm all done and I put the thwart or the seat, the bench, that it's going to hit the cleat on each side and sit on top of the dagger box like it's supposed to. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm going to start sculpting those breast hooks and crowning them and trying to get them finished out. And as we're doing that, I'll have Kathy come out and kind of a few times during the process so you kind of get an idea of what's involved in getting those crowned and sculpted and fit in place and all that stuff. So see you after a while.
Sounds good. See you later.